Yeah.
He's emailing everybody a link. Scott, he's emailing us all a
I
link.
just figured people are gonna ask, like, there's, for
Yeah,
a
I mean,
public
just-
meeting, it should be available. Even if it's not live.
No, I get it. I get it. That's just not something we've ever done, so nobody was ready for it.
Sorry, I just assumed.
She takes the minutes though, right?
We
Anyway,
always, no, and she takes much more complete minutes. now
Yeah.
than we used to.
I mean, she takes the minutes, right? But yeah.
All right, we are moments from go. Are the microphones on? No.
Yes.
Hello, hello,
Not there.
First class.
hello, 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 hello. Gene, can you hear me back there? Hello? Yes? Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, let's go ahead and get started. And when you're talking, put the microphone in front of you so that it picks up, please.
Okay, great. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for the joint work session and the opportunity to be able to have a conversation since we last met with regards to the office hours a few weeks ago. You have a packet in front of you. It should be a summary document of the text amendment as well as the ordinance itself. I'm going to walk through the summary document, but provide much more clarity with regards to the items that are bulleted out in the document so that you could then follow along with the ordinance if you'd like to do that. I'll read through each section and then we can pause and have any conversation that's necessary for that. That's a great point. So we also, again, just to talk a little bit about process, we did start meeting with you all in March. That's when we had our first conversation about these text amendments and items that you were seeing where there were some inconsistencies with regards to perhaps the comprehensive plan, the UDC, as well as just what you were hearing from the community itself. And so we got some really good feedback from both of you, from both groups, the commission and the council on those items. Then we were able to break those items down into topics, and that's how we've now framed the ordinance amendment that we're putting before you today. And then we came before you, talked to you about those 8 topics, and then we've gone and we've looked at the UDC and tried to really solve some of those inconsistencies. And then we held office hours where we met with a majority of you all to go over some options or recommendations for how to solve those inconsistencies. And we got really good, solid feedback on our direction and where we were going with regards to those 8 topics. And so that's what we feel like we're now at a good point to present to you all our solid recommendation for moving forward. And so that's what we're here to do today.
Keep going, keep
Okay,
going.
great. I'll start with section 1, timing of open space preservation during the development process. The intent of this provision to clarify language and to revise the city's development regulations to ensure that preservation is concurrent with development phases in order to accomplish the city's future conservation strategy. Summary of the revisions, the revised language as necessary. That revised language occurs in subsection 1A, specifically A1 and A4, and subsection 1B. And it's just a series of a few words in terms of revised language. Code requires open space preservation concurrent with building completion by phase in the village, hamlet, and historic crossroads districts. That's indicated in subsection 1C, concurrency. It clarifies the concurrency requirement in order to ensure that 80% open space preservation occurs concurrent with 80% of the issuance of building permits.
So what we were finding in our engagement with all y'all and with all right, thank you. Was that the ability to sort of track with completion of phases, each step, and making sure that the conservation easements get filed along those phases. And what we've discovered since then is that there is actually a substantial amount of conservation easements working their way through the process. Some are in the developer side, some are on Mike's desk, and that they are in the process, and substantial amounts are coming through. So that's and this is basically is making sure that that as the phases get completed, the conservation easements get filed. So.
And the key here is that if you're not keeping up, we can revoke building permits and all that to make sure that you do.
Along with that, I'd like to add, I mean, I understand the process, the ideal process, number one, if we do it in phases, then we need them to preserve that land in phases. There's been a lot of talk around here. We've been upset about, trying to permit a whole development instead of permitting it by phases. So, I think that summarizes that. You need to permit it by phases. And as the development gets done, the land needs to be put into conservation. Me, I'm still a little bit against that. I think that everybody, if you're a developer, you're capable of drawing a map. I don't see why we can't come up with a fair percentage, whether that be 20, 25%, 30% of the land up front that needs to be preserved before you even build. I mean, if you're going to preserve 70% of the land, you should be able to find a spot to say, hey, City of Chattahoochee Hills, this is my opening bid, whether that would be the amount of land that would accommodate, say, phase one. Now this builder comes around, he builds out phase one. He's already got his land under conservation. Guess what? I feel a lot more confident when he stands up here and explains to me phase two that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. We've had a problem kind of chasing preservation a little bit. We've had a problem with more land being annexed into a development to move the goalpost back. I mean, the council years ago flatly just did not annex any more land until land was put in preservation. And what I want to do is stay away from that situation. I think developers need to, they need to show some good faith up front. Or personally, if you don't want to preserve something up front in a city that's all about preservation, all about buffers, all about protecting everything, I personally don't even think you should fill out the document and give it the money. I don't want to have any more of my time wasted. And I think that would put a nice, I think it would allow everyone to feel very comfortable with who we're doing business with. And I think too, it helps answer the question if a developer has money, has access to funds, he's not afraid to go ahead and put that 20, 30% in conservation up front. He's ready to go. He's ready to build. And I think that's what we got to protect ourselves from.
We've had this conversation before.
What made you set it up this way? After hearing that, preservation and chasing it is such a problem. This is basically how it's been. Once you do a phase, we need you to put some land in conservation, but that ain't how it works. What we do is we have to beg, borrow, steal, do whatever. And I think if there's a way to eliminate that up front, why wouldn't we?
So I think two things, right? One is that our zoning requires the preservation from the beginning. It's mapped from the beginning, and in every phase, in every building that's put up, that math is checked. The conservation easement is the suspenders on the belt that the zoning already is. The belt is already holding up the pants. So that's one thing. And we've always been at better than 70% on any development that is in the city. And I think the consensus was what you've got here. I guess that some people don't agree.
That is a consensus.
Question.
Yes.
Further to what he was saying. And I'm still learning about the TDR and the TDC. When,
Mitch, can you pull that up to you?
yeah, I'm sorry. Regarding the TDR and the TDC, as a developer, I know that when you have to put money up front, you're more committed to the project. And I see all kinds of numbers flying around about different side projects. When do the developers have to put the money up? If I were this, I would say they'd have to put the money up front. If it's a $1 billion project, $10 million should be nothing for them to put it up And they know that they'll lose that if they don't perform. Is that the way it's set up?
I think
Are you
I think
talking
your
about-
question is, you're talking about like a bond or something like
Right.
that? Or are you talking about the development right?
Cash.
But with regards to the open space preservation concurrency,
I'm talking about getting approval to proceed. They have to provide documentation that they're gonna have a certain amount of preservation, right?
And that's usually the plan.
Right.
It's in
But
that,
what goes,
which becomes the zoning.
okay, what else goes along with that? What forces them? Money.
well, you all have fees
What-
associated with the application.
And our permitting doesn't let you do anything unless you are showing that the preservation is there. Every single phase, every single time they come in, you have to show it in the plat where the preservation is, and that land is protected. You don't get permits to do anything in the protected land. That's from day one.
The developer to do what he says he's gonna, or she's gonna
The
do.
fact that they don't get permits to do things that don't match the plan.
And then if they get to 80% and they haven't
Protected 80%.
protected 80%, then they get no more permits.
Well, wait,
Right.
again, let's be clear about what's protected. Protected is in the zoning from day one,
Correct.
right? Percentage is protected from day one. Putting it into a conservation easement, which makes that preservation immutable now, the boundaries of it immutable, happens when they get to a certain stage of development, because the reality is, as you're moving through a project, it may be that there's rock in one place and you have to move something over. Every time that there's a small plan change like that, the math is done to show that the 70% is still there. So the preservation is in every time there's a permit pulled, it's checked. The locking it down permanently happens when you're done with a phase at enough level of completion that you know you're not going to have to move a street to get around some rock, or move a lot to get around something, or whatever.
But wouldn't you know that before you began? I mean, I'm used to something called the docs. I don't. You disclose, it would be a condition at the beginning. You would know where the roads have to be moved. You'd know everything about that. There be no surprises.
And we start digging, there's always
Yeah,
surprises.
there's no surprises, unfortunately.
Especially in residential development where you're not clear cutting and mass grading, right? I mean,
Right.
it's one thing when you're building a warehouse and you're mass grading, clear cutting an area, it's much easier to say exactly where everything's going to be. But when you're putting in residential, when you're trying to be sensitive to the land, like our zoning asks you to be, yeah, it's quite common that there is a section where there's too much rock here, and so you move those lots over a little bit. It's actually quite common in residential development. Especially in a condition where you're not doing mass grading and mass clearing, which is what our zoning kind of presupposes. And again, the fact that we do the math every single time a set of plans comes in to make sure that we're in compliance means that the 70% is always protected. And then again, at some point, and 80% is what our paradigm is, it's locked down with conservation easements, which again, nobody else does that either. So that's an extra layer of preservation that other people don't do. Any other? Yeah.
Would it make sense? We mentioned this in the office hour part. There are parts where people can't build, like the buffers and stream beds and so on. So isn't that a good opportunity, since they can't do anything there anyway, to say, put it in preservation?
Yes, preserved by the
Those-
nature of what it is.
Those are preserved by the nature of what they are. They're
Mhm.
preserved in the zoning, in the drawings, in the plat, right? The buffers are required to be preserved. The only thing you're doing by carving off the easement is increasing the cost of surveying and all of that. Stuff's already preserved. It can't be built on. We won't give permits on it. So the preservation is happening
Right.
already. It's built in.
Right, and they can't build on it at any time, at any stage anyway.
And again, any other? I mean, we've talked about this a lot over the course of time, and I get it. It's a new conversation for some folks, and happy to go through it for new folks, but this is a conversation that we've been having for a long time in council, and this was kind of the sweet spot that what we found. We've added some teeth to the enforcement piece of it, and make it clear that we'll hold permits if you're not caught up.
Who enforced? Mike. Mike does mine.
Has there been a problem before where someone said they're gonna, it seems to me it's kind of cut and dry. Is that how?
I wouldn't know if there's been a problem.
It seems like if you're gonna zone something hamlet or village, it's pretty cut and dry what you have to do. And you know you can't build in the buffers. I'm just trying, are we trying to have a solution to a problem that we've had? We're trying to circumvent a problem because I see what I'm reading here. It makes perfect sense.
What we've done, Rodney, is we chased preservation for years.
How?
Now, the council, the previous council made it real clear, we were not annexing any more land until you put something in preservation. So what I'm trying to do, or what I think is important. for
What did you say? Annex?
I mean, annex land, you know what that means, bring it in.
From another city.
I'll put this in plain English, Rod. I understand where you stand. I get that, okay? What I'm telling you, it's the previous council. When Don Hayes, Claire, and some other people, when they started wanting to annex land, pull TDRs and do all that, stretch the goalposts back. That's what they wanted to do. We said, no. You're gonna put some land in preservation, 100 acres got wound up put in preservation. What I'm trying to avoid is having what I consider a useless conversation. If a developer comes in the front and wants to put a little bit of land in preservation, I agree with Mitch. You need to move a rock or something that is, I get it, that happens. That's nothing major. That's a piece of it, it's blazing, blow it up, move on and move over 20 feet. That's what developers do.
But if you have a conservation easement in place, you can't do that. The other thing too, that when we actually had that conversation with Serenby, back when Don Hayes was on the council, we made clear that if a hamlet expanded, that the phases stayed the phases. So the fact that you were adding on didn't mean that you now had to get to 80% of the whole. It was still phase one, when it got to 80%, had to be locked down. Phase two, when it got to 80%, had to be locked down. We made that clear. I'm not sure that it was clear before then, but we made that clear, and that's what happened. And that's how we keep up with it now, phase by phase. That's to be clear, right? So yes, if a hamlet gets added onto, gets added onto in phases, those phases also then have their own completion requirements.
And Mike
Right.
enforces it.
Cat. There's a detailed spreadsheet. I've seen it of Serenby. And at one point we had it posted on the city website of this, what that looked like. So yeah, I've seen it's updated. I know.
How much land is in conservation right now?
Right now as you're talking about Serenby's open space, yeah, with under conservation, it's a little over 100 acres.
And how many are in action right now that are about to be coming in?
Do you know the number? I don't have a number.
It'll be close to 350, I think.
Right. We've got 250 that are being worked on right now.
Have this ready, the whole, the baseline requirements by the city, which we're having to comply with, requires pretty intensive work from an outside contractor. So we're ready to sign the Cs right now and have it all laid out, but we're now meeting the city's requirements of advance. So it's there are additional things.
We changed the way that we require them.
There's a baseline doc that you have to have a third party come in and say, like, this is what the woods look like. and
Right.
this is with detailed pictures and reports that are multiple pages long and fairly intensive. We can't just like sign a piece of paper with a flag. We'd be happy to do that.
Well, I would hate to say, but I would argue that. I think if you start up front and you preserve it up front, you got 100 acres, you can't pick out 30 acres to preserve up front. And, you know, giving away TDRs on land that is naturally protected by what it is, if it's a stream or a buffer, I mean, a mud hole, I don't know how you get a TDR on that. You can't use it anyway, but I mean, that's the way it's set up.
If I may, just because I realize I'm the only one in the room that goes through the process. Before we get something platted, we have to Mike holds us accountable. Mike in his office holds us accountable, and we have to turn in where our accounts are. Meaning, instead of pointing in the microphone.
Every time.
So every time it's pretty intensive. So if anyone hasn't been through it, or anybody in planning commission or city council hasn't been part of it, Mike and Serenby are part of it pretty intensely. If we're coming forward with Spella of 70 lots, we work with Mike the city to say, here are the additional 70 acres that we're identifying that will be our green space. Here are the counts of everything that we've had platted against what's both in CE and what's set aside that will be in CE. And so it's a pretty intensive process if you haven't seen it in the works. We don't just get to nefariously say, one day we'll save 70 acres. We have to actually identify for these 70 lots, here are the 70 acres that we are upfront identifying will be in a CE. And the only reason that we don't put it in a CE at the time is if for some reason a lot has to move 10 feet to accommodate rock that we didn't anticipate, or because of the way our CEs are written, we want to make sure that if a trail goes through it or a paved road has to go through it for access, that all of the things are identified in the baseline document that is required for the CE. It has to almost happen after the fact, because if we create a baseline document and then through development have to do something from a trail or a play structure that's not in the baseline document, you know, it's complex in nature. But what everyone needs to understand is that it's not like a careless or casual process. We all know and work together on identifying developed area and conserved area before a plat is issued.
There's a perfect example of it in Motto, on the hillside of Motto, where there was just under the surface, about an 80-foot long granite boulder. And there had been a bunch of houses planned on that, a bunch of lots drawn on that piece of land. Boulder that had a couple places where when they did the probe surveys, it didn't show the size of the thing. And so they basically just moved those lots down a little bit around the corner, made this open space, moved that open space. If that had been under conservation easement, they wouldn't have been able to do that, right? But the fact that Mike does this math every single time makes it easy to say, oh yeah, that's fine. If we swap these two, we're still at over 70%, all good. So that is the way this process works. It's reality based. And again, never ever are we beyond 70% or less than 70% of preservation. And I get it's one of those things that we talked about again and again, but the consensus is that this is the right way to do it. And so that's the consensus.
Section 2, higher review standards to improve development feasibility. It's the intent of this revision to reduce cities' risk and staff effort and expense on speculative and feasible projects, especially relative to developers' ability to provide infrastructure. Summary of the revision. Code requires specific information regarding the proposed application, such as utility availability and feasibility, as well as details concerning phasing, timing, development partners, and funding. This is identified in subsection 2A, specifically numbers 9 and 10. These additional requirements of the applicant during a rezoning are additional information regarding infrastructure, timing, and feasibility, as well as development timeline, process, partners, and funding.
This comes back to some of the stuff that you were bringing up, Scott, about, getting the letters from utilities and that kind of thing, confirming that sort of detail.
Do those letters address the timeline of availability, with a water provider? Might have 7 developments looking for supply to be supplied. Do those letters that address availability and capacity also contain timelines for those availabilities and capacities?
Not at this time.
Should they? Given the scarcity of some of these resources?
I'm not sure if that is actually something that a utility can provide.
And they've got long range plans, but as far as their, when those requirements are brought online for, or when those services are brought online for a particular development, they react more than they proact on those situations. And so they may have a certain timeline for a certain development over here that then doesn't happen. And so they can take that capacity over here.
So a municipality could completely overcommit to multiple developments and then get to the end of the line and say, sorry, we're out of water.
I'm not
For
sure
a few
about
more
that.
years or something.
That's happened other places.
Yeah. I just don't know. So
Yeah,
it seems like an obvious
it's
question.
happened. I haven't heard about it in the metro region.
Not in the metro
But
region.
that's definitely happened in other locations.
The-
The
the-
real key here is this feasibility, the requirement, the engineering study that's going to be required out of this. So what's going to happen now is you're not going to get a proposal that is, you get a proposal, but it'll be very obvious very quickly if it's infeasible at the engineering study level that's going to be required, is particularly for sewer, and other sort of, potentially even water as well. But those in particular, that's going to be a substantial commitment on the part of a developer, to get that, feasibility analysis completed, and it will reveal whether or not it really is feasible.
Okay.
There's something else we can set up too, because both Atlanta Watershed and Fulton County are well into both 20 and 50-year expansion plans for the southwest part of Fulton County that incorporate basically, what the zoning would allow in all the different municipalities down here. Fulton County is already running sewer lines to several nodes in Chattahoochee Hills. Atlanta Watershed is already here. They've got a water line that was originally built to supply all of Coweta County that comes straight through Chattahoochee Hills, for example. So that it's not a capacity issue here, it's only a timing issue. And that, they're trying to be ready for, and that's what the letters will talk to is, yes, we can get it here, we can get it there.
If I remember
But I'm
correctly,
happy to get those people in to help people understand that
Yeah.
they've been here before.
if I'm remembering correctly, I believe that Atlanta's withdrawal allowance from the Chattahoochee, the city of Atlanta's waterworks department is less than half of their allowed withdrawal. So they've got plenty of capacity, whether or not they've got a deliverable. That's a different issue, but as far as the withdrawal capacity.
Go ahead, Doug.
Feasibility plan. 9.2, section 9.2.
I believe that's right.
It's subsection 2A, number 9 and 10.
Doug, we
That
can hear
is
you.
the feasibility plan. Yes, Doug.
Question was if the feasibility plan was, what you're talking about is in subsection 9.2.
It is.
Okay.
You're correct. Subsection 2A9, and it's actually identified as 2, that there's a feasible plan to provide infrastructure to serve the proposed development.
There is a differential between what a utility provider can provide and what an engineering firm is going to analyze to get you those services. And so those two are now.
And so many, too many contingencies would render it non-feasible theoretically, right?
Correct.
The other thing too is I think it would be wise for a developer coming in for a big project to be able to say that they've talked to them. I mean, say in these letters when it's coming. That's all grist for the mill.
Is there a phase 1 and phase 2 requirement?
Those,
That probably.
yeah,
Phase one and
those
phase
are
two.
generally lender requirements, when you are getting a piece of property. If you're generally speaking, when you have a transaction, if the phase 1 is usually almost always done on any sort of major sort of piece of property. And then a phase 2 is only done if phase 1 reveals something.
Right, that's if they're gonna be getting a loan. But can you make the phase 1 and phase 2 a requirement? As part of the application? You have experience with that, right?
Normally at EPA, we would just. Normally at the EPA, what we would just do, the feasibility study would address the whole project. We didn't necessarily do it in phases.
So you decide up front whether or not any of it's gonna work or not, if it's just too complicated of a deal to even get into.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
So is that included in the requirement that a?
It's not
environmental
currently, the environmental studies that you're talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental studies. Those are not part of what is required for this. Generally speaking, that is done, that is more of a private, market sort of requirement.
Do you think it would be good to have it?
I think that would be up to the council and commissions. At least the phase 1 component of it is usually something that's, fairly, of due course, things that occur. So, I don't think it would be terribly burdensome on the developer to have that as part of their submittals.
Hey, Mike, when are environmental impact statements required?
Well, the environmental statements that we see in the applicant's packages.
Right, right. There's some site analysis required, not a formal phase one environmental study. So we don't have a trigger in the code currently for a full phase one environmental study.
I think there's been some practice where I've seen phase ones being done by the developer. And phase two, of course, is a basic, phase one is desktop. And so, yeah, okay, all right. So there is some requirement for some environmental assessment.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
That's more site analysis.
Charles,
can-
let's talk about, I was just gonna say, let's talk about how that might fit in.
I was gonna ask you, Charles, what would be some of the reasons that they would deny that feasibility study? I mean, if you look at it and you say, okay, all this not gonna work. What would that be? The lay of the land?
So normally, DPA normally had set requirements that we were looking for. So the only way we would deny that feasibility study, like say we might have like anywhere from like 10 to 15 different standards. So if those standards are not met, then we would disapprove the feasibility study. But that would be the only way we would disapprove
Deny
it from
it.
a developer. Yes,
So either they cooperate with your 10 or 15 rules, or we can't do anything.
correct.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
And they're bound by the law regardless,
Correct. Correct.
to be clear, EPD two.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll look at that component.
Thank you.
On number 10 there. The last two words, it reads a statement detailing the anticipated start time, phasing, and construction timeline of the project, as well as the anticipated development process, partners, and funding. Of what does that consist?
The goal there is to get information that makes the council feel comfortable that the person that they're talking to can pull off the thing that they're going to do.
So we can ask about their funding. So do we?
And know who we're doing business with, who are all the partners that are involved, who we're doing business with.
There is a bit of a concern around how much of that you can ask, because you can't, not approve something because of who's applying for it. But as far as your ability to, feel confident about that they're able to do this, that's something you can take into consideration.
Do those details need to be, do we need to delineate those details in some way?
I think that's more of an administrative thing from Mike's department to determine. So when that is
I think Mike
satisfied.
and the city attorney, because again, we don't
Yeah.
want to run foul of any fair housing law or any of that kind of thing as we're looking at these sorts of things.
I think applicants come in with different pieces of the puzzle in place. And so it'll depend, it'll vary probably from project to project, what bits of detail we're able to get and what's still to come.
But again, we've never asked for that kind of background intentionally before. We're asking for it now. As a part of the calculus you guys can do when you're looking at a project.
Well, I think you have to. I think it's part of due diligence. I mean, you just can't give permits to people who are broke and hold up land like that. You can't do that. I mean, every mortgage company does that. They check you got a job, what's your income before you can just move in. The car lot does it. Everybody does it. You want to build something that's $100 million. We have the right to do due diligence. If that pisses you off, then don't come here. Every bank asks for verification. That's what we're doing. We're acting as basically a transaction broker. That's what we're doing. So if we're going to do that, we need some assurances. I don't know why that seems to be like walking on eggshells. I just heard a guy tell me about bulldozing 26 acres of buffer.
I don't think anybody's arguing with you.
Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Section 3 buffer requirements. Is the intent of this revision to clarify language and to consider conditions where buffers may or may not be permitted within the city as a means of balancing limited growth areas with the allowance of amenities and services as identified on the comprehensive plan. Summary of revisions. I'll read through all of these and then we can pause. Revise language as necessary and an additional illustration. The revised language occurs in subsection 3B. specifically F1, F3, and F6. And then there's an additional illustration, figure 5-8 F6, which illustrates the buffer exemption. Second bullet, code requires a buffer on property adjacent to a city boundary. That's identified in subsection 3A. It's the last entry in your table, requiring a buffer of 75 feet for development adjacent to a city boundary. Third bullet, code allows a buffer exemption in the village VL or Hamlet HM districts along non-scenic roads and excluding South Fulton Parkway with design standards, and that council may determine alternative standards in certain situations per specific conditions. That's two elements there. The first element, subsection 3B, number 6, is the city's primary buffer exemption in the VL or HM district along a non-scenic road, except for South Fulton Parkway. It allows a maximum of 500 feet for village districts and 250 feet for hamlet districts, and now includes an illustration for clarity. Subsection 3B, number 7, clarifies that council has the ability to provide alternative standards for buffer exemptions along non-scenic roads within the city with conditions. The fourth bullet, code allows a buffer exemption in the village VL or hamlet HM districts for agricultural uses that are visible from an adjacent property or thoroughfare with design standards, and all other uses must be screened from view. And that's identified in subsection 3B, number 8.
This is where we will have varied a bit from the office hours descriptions. There were proposals for more complete or more codified versions of buffer exemptions, but there was a very clear consensus that council and commission really wanted to hold that in their own hands and look at each case by case. And so all the biggest piece of this is really adding illustration to the exemption that already, or the exception that already exists, just so that it's very clear how it works. And then adding the first two bullet items, but also saying that you have the ability to make these buffer requirements, but it is on a case by case basis.
Again, that would only be if the council thought that it made better sense for the city to allow it. The presumption is that they're not allowed.
Correct.
As we sort of acknowledge, truly zoning variances are based upon some real specific constitutional law around size, shape, and topography of a lot. And so that will have to be in place for Mike to be able to sort of make a staff recommendation and for you all to sort of follow on with that. But with a little bit of this guidance, then you're able to take into some account some other things that it would allow them in appropriate situations.
Could you explain the code requires a buffer on property adjacent to a city boundary? So if I live beside the boundary, I need to buffer some of my property. Is that what that's saying? Or
No, it's when the development occurs adjacent to a city boundary.
somebody lives beside there, they're good.
Yeah,
No, it's only for
no changes
development.
required
Okay.
from existing situations.
Correct.
Any questions about that?
Yes.
Uses the same exclusion. Reading. That it only applies to non-scenic roads and carves out and not South Fulton Parkway.
Correct.
Why is that? Why was that? And what does that mean in English?
Means that you can't have a buffer exception on either a scenic road or on the parkway. You can only even consider this thing on a non-scenic road in the city.
I know, but why is it excluding South Fulton Parkway?
Because the consensus of the
That was
council
the
was they didn't want
consensus.
windows on the parkway.
So the way I read this is there is no buffer. There's a buffer exemption. There is a buffer exemption on South Fulton Parkway.
No.
The double
No.
negative.
No. So South Fulton Parkway is not a scenic road, so it's non-scenic roads except for South Fulton Parkway.
How many scenic roads are there in Chattahoochee Hills?
3, I believe.
3, okay. So South Fulton Parkway is not okay.
Correct. So we would not want to include South Fulton Parkway under the definition of a non-scenic road. So that's why it spells it out specifically.
Yeah, I should have said that because it's not scenic.
Right.
Anything else?
Number eight. Number eight, agricultural uses in a village or hamlet may be visible from an adjacent property or thoroughfare. Why? It's a buffer.
I think the point is that you don't have to create a buffer in that situation.
If you have a farm that's in your buffer and you have trees beyond the farm that keep you from seeing into the hamlet, you don't have to put a buffer around the farm. For example, if the farm is a part of your open space, you don't have to buffer it. It's already the farm that you see in the countryside. That's why. Agricultural uses that just happen to be a part of your buffer can be visible.
That is the intent of number 8.
Okay.
The goal there is to preserve your scenic views that exist currently.
Right.
I'm sorry, but I'm dying to ask this question.
Okay.
You all understand what an architectural style is that's found within 250 miles of the site between 1800.
So we were talking about that on the way down.
Yes.
It's the goal there is there are sort of a history of architectural styles, and these styles were mainly sort of done in certain periods, so we know that the Victorian period, for example, went from 1830 I think to 1890 roughly, and somewhere in 1910 even as much. And so the idea there is that the community itself is you're not going to find certain certain styles outside of the sort of the indigenous zone of this area, and those sort of historic resources are pretty well documented. And so, yeah.
And this is not new. This is in the code.
The 100 was, and the expansion of it, what that does is it gives you a little bit more flexibility to find some examples of perhaps of styles. But the reality is that there's that's not that much more that you're going to be getting.
Right. You're trying to codify the
And there are
yeah, you're
companies
codifying the vernacular.
there are companies that would be happy to charge us a couple $100,000 to come up with real design guidelines that call out size of cornices and window, all of that kind of thing. But, if you say things that were built in the farming history of this area are the archetypes that you can use, and if you can show an example of something that was built in, those times, then you can do that. Gets you there without having to spend all the money to do the design lines. Frankly, it gives you more flexibility, because no matter how tightly you try to draw them, you'll not allow some cool thing like the bent awning that covers the Blue-Eyed Daisy's seating area or whatever, right? Like,
Right. It also ensures that you all continue to have some variety here
Mhm.
within reason, within your vernacular that you currently have.
Next.
Okay. Section number 4, subdivision of lots and minimum lot size in the RL district. The intent of this revision is to clarify language and to modify the requirements for farmette subdivisions and family lots to maintain the rural character of the city and minimize aesthetic and other impacts associated with the subdivision of lots per the comprehensive plan. Summary of revisions: revised language as necessary. Revised language occurs in subsection 4A and 4B. In subsection 4A, the revised language is found within the table. It removes the separate references of hamlet mixed use and hamlet residential, revises the minimum non-residential area per gross acre within the VL district to 100 square feet. And in C2, which is below the table, it requires the applicant to also include a DTC agreement at the time of preliminary plating. Revised language is also found in subsection 4B. For clarity, the lot size regulations are now written in sentence form versus a table with asterisks. Revised language is also found in subsection 4E, and that clarifies the definition of a minor subdivision as 5 or fewer lots. Second bullet, code specifies additional requirements for farmette subdivisions and family lots and requires these specifications to be indicated on the final plat. Subsection 4C, farmette subdivisions. A, clarifies the process for creation of a farmette, i.e. minor or major subdivision process. D, requires farmettes to meet buffer requirements of subsection 5-8E. E and F specifies requirements concerning maximum land disturbance for both residential uses and agricultural structures. H requires a conservation easement for the portion of the property that is outside of the residential use disturbance area. Subsection 4D, family lots. A clarifies that one family lot may be created from any property existing on January 1st, 2007. G requires specific language to be included on the family lot deed. Subsection 4F is additional plat requirements indicated in the last row of your table. Specific provisions pertaining to the Farmette subdivision and family lots are to be a requirement of the final plat, and also any additional provisions per staff request. And it's indicated there that it's the Farmette letters D and E and family lots letters B, E, and F.
This is another bit of a divergence from what we may have shown you during the office hours. We had a formula for a sort of a sliding scale of how some lots may sort of occur in a minor subdivision configuration, and we were very proud of that formula. It took us a long time to come up with it, but I think we heard the consensus very much so that this needs to be really, for a family opportunities, and that the minor subdivisions should be, we sort of did some analysis on how many could actually occur and what sort of impact it might have had on the community. And so we really heard clearly that this should remain at one as possible, and we made it clearer and a little more enforceable around it being a family family use. One other thing, the minimum non-commercial, non-residential floor area was a bit of a reaction to some understanding we've had about in a village how the residential minimum, or so the non-residential minimum, so basically your retail component, is getting harder these days, really because of the sort of people call the Amazon effect. And we were able to, with our other consultants, sort of find some good precedent on what that number should be, that ultimately would make villages more viable and something not to be avoided in your ordinance, to avoid that minimum, and then thereby driving a potential village to be able to create the preservation that you're looking for it to create.
There was.
You mind walking back through civic changes?
Absolutely. I'll start from the top. Absolutely. First bullet, revised language as necessary. The revised language occurs in subsections 4A and 4B. In subsection 4A, the revised language is found within the table. It removes the separate references of Hamlet mixed use and Hamlet residential. So now you just have HM, Hamlet, and we'll discuss that in the next section. It revises your minimum non-residential area per gross acre within the VL district to 100 square feet. And in C2, which is below the table, requires the applicant to include a DTC agreement at the time of preliminary platting.
So that was really where we heard that. How are you going to be delivering your credits? Are you going to be doing it within your own development, or are you going to be going out into the market and buying them through the city in this case? So that's that clarification on how that, with that additional information, what you can expect.
Right. Revised language in subsection 4B. For clarity, the lot size regulations have not changed. They're just now written in sentence form. Revised language found in subsection 4E is clarifying the definition of a minor subdivision as 5 or fewer lots. The second bullet, code specifies additional requirements for Farmette subdivisions and family lots and requires these specifications to be indicated on the final plat. Subsection 4C, Farmette subdivisions. A, clarifies the process for creation of a Farmette, i.e. minor or major subdivision process. D, requires Farmettes to meet buffer requirements of subsection 5-8E. E and F specifies requirements concerning maximum land disturbance for both residential uses and agricultural structures. H requires a conservation easement for the portion of the property that is outside of the residential use disturbance area. Subsection 4D, family lots. A clarifies that one family lot may be created from any property existing on January 1st, 2007. G requires a specific language to be included on the family lot deed. Subsection 4F, additional plat requirements are indicated in the last row of that table. Specific provisions pertaining to the Farmette subdivision and family lots are to now be a requirement of the final plat, and also any additional provisions per staff request. And it specifically indicates the Farmette letters D and E and family letters B, E, and F. Oh, that's G. Thank you.
Biggest thing here is making sure that it's all documented in a way that's clear and permanent, right?
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions about that?
Section number 5, viability and impact of residential hamlets. It's the intent of this revision to clarify language and to eliminate residential hamlet HMR, as this zoning district is no longer maintaining rural character or creating walkable centers where people can live, work, play, and worship without the use of the car per the city's comprehensive plan. Summary of revisions. Code deletes any reference to residential hamlet HMR or mixed-use hamlet HMMU and clarifies all references solely as hamlet HM. Subsections 5A-5E, so from 5A through 5E. It's revising the city's zoning districts, required open and civic spaces, district intent, mixed-use concurrency, and district size regulations to remove any reference to HMR and HMMU and replaces this language with hamlet HM. So it's not making any changes. It's just simply removing those references to the two separate hamlets because you'll now only have one hamlet as a zoning district.
And this really came out of our retreat, where we sort of identified that the residential hamlet was really just ended up being a subdivision. The densities weren't enough to sort of create sort of the clustering that you were hoping for, and that without any mixed use, that you end up driving people out onto the roadways for their every use that they could possibly need. And so in the comprehensive development plan, where you sort of are calling for the garnering the benefits of mixed use, that's why the purely residential hamlet was consensus that that be eliminated, and that you only have mixed use hamlets.
Any questions about that?
Acreage, does that change at all?
It didn't change.
All right.
Section number 6, hamlet expansion clustering criteria. It's the intent of this revision to clarify language and to definitively require clustering in the village VL or hamlet HM districts to facilitate internal connection and buffering, minimize the fragmentation of open space, and support the city's comprehensive plan. Summary of revisions, revised language as necessary, and additional illustration. The revised language occurs in subsection 6B. B, open space networks, clarifies that all open space must be at least 50 feet in length and width, except as noted. And the additional illustration is figure 6-2A, illustrating clustering and district conservation lot standards. The second bullet, code requires clustering standards for both residential and mixed-use clustering with specified exemptions, including a maximum distance for single-family and commercial lots and district conservation lots, which require an increase in open space preservation and a limitation of acreage. I'm going to walk you through that. Subsection 6A, clustering. A2, lowercase a through lowercase c, clarifies residential and mixed-use clustering requirements within the VL and HM districts. A2, lowercase d, specifies exemptions to the clustering requirement and 4 specific conditions. A3 requires additional conditions for the district conservation lot exemption and includes an illustration.
This is all just tightening and clarification. Anybody have any questions about how any of this is laid out? Giving people a second to kind of read.
We are very proud of that diagram, by the way. It's gone through its own, glad that one survived. It's gone through some mini revisions, but I think this is a good example where picture's worth 1,000 words.
Help with conformance. Yeah.
Two main goals here, right? One is that the clusters of housing are all walkable to uses that you might have as daily uses, restaurants, whatever the things that you might walk to. That's what helps us maintain the much lower trip generation that you get out of the mixed use topologies that we allow. 3 trips per day externally or less compared to the 12 that you might get in a traditional suburban development. Which really reduces the impact outside, right? The whole goal is to keep people off of the roads in the community outside of a development. And this is what helps make that happen because everything is walkable then for most of the residents. And then to the extent that you do have some houses out a little more distributed from the centers, the goal is to make sure that the open spaces around them are as contiguous as possible. So you get real open space around them as well. And again, a lot of conversation about how to make that happen. And the drawing does a fantastic job of representing how it works on the land. So appreciate all the work that went into that.
And it really puts there's a lot, maximum sizes in there. And, you know, in those sort of more far flung areas, we end up with 90% preservation requirements. So, you know, it really is just houses in open space. That allows more the open space to sort of flow more easily in those areas and allows you to preserve sort of viable farming opportunities as well as viable forestry opportunities instead of cutting it into 20-acre chunks.
And even that has to be internally connected, right?
Right.
So that those people can get
internally
on their
buffered.
golf cart or on their car.
Internally buffered.
Cart or whatever, so that it's not visible from outside and they don't have to leave to get the services either. Keep them off of the outside roads. That's the goal on all of these things as much as possible. Any questions? None. Let's move on.
Section number 7, reviewing, modifying the allowed uses within the rural RL district. It's the intent of this revision to clarify language and to increase parcel size for specific uses on the permitted use table within the rural RL district and to update certain requirements within specific supplemental use provisions.
Just a reminder that ultimately what we're talking about here is when a plan has been submitted and it's been approved, sometimes there are still requirements for special use permits underneath. And so some of the effort at this was to sort of clarify when and where, and we proposed a few more than were originally some of the original ones we proposed were not well received. So those are out and Shannon will go through some of the details.
These are also, by the way, just you had said in developments, but also there are some special use permits there for things out in the RL.
Right, in the RL.
And there were changes in some of those as well.
The revised language as necessary, including revising gas station to fueling station. Revised language occurs in subsection 7A and 7B. In subsection 7A, B time limits, the revision is one word only from in to on in the second sentence. In subsection 7B, it clarifies the use definition of fueling stations. The second bullet, code requires a specific parcel size for the following uses in the RL district: country inn, recreational vehicle, RV or campground, college, university or professional school, motion picture or sound recording facility, event center large, air transportation, airport private. In subsection 7C-H, that's your permitted use table. It revises the parcel size for the permitted uses specified above, specifically identifying a parcel size of 70 acres or more for recreational vehicle, RV, or campground, motion picture or sound recording facility, event center large, and air transportation airport private, and now requires a parcel size of 10 acres or more for a country inn and college, university, or professional school. Third bullet, code specified additional requirements within the following supplemental use provisions: agricultural retail, air transportation, airport private, festivals or events occasional, outdoor, indoor, motor vehicle or recreational vehicle sales and rental, outdoor dining, roadside stands, data processing services, and gas stations now revised to fueling stations. I'm going to walk you through those additional requirements as specified in subsection 7D through 7L. 7D, agricultural retail, B1 clarifies the percentage of the displayed inventory of the products sold. B4 through B5 clarifies the building sizes based on acreage. 7E, air transportation airport private, C1 clarifies the distances between the end of the runway and both an adjoining property line of an offsite dwelling and of a property line of any other use.
And to be clear here, those distances are much larger than they were previously.
Correct. C2 clarifies the distance between the landing area, building or structure or navigational aid and the adjoining property line. Again, increased. 7F, festivals or events, occasional, outdoor, indoor. P4 clarifies that the minimum lot size and maximum attendance hours are to be as adopted in the city's adopted fee ordinance. 7G, motor vehicle or recreational vehicle sales and rental. Z2 and Z3 clarifies the visibility of vehicles from public and private streets. 7H, outdoor dining. BB1 lowercase a clarifies the minimum unobstructed sidewalk clear area along any commercial street, avenue, or boulevard thoroughfare type and along any thoroughfare types, and that increases as well. Roadside stands, MM3 clarifies the visibility of temporary sanitary facilities or trash receptacles from any city street. 7J, data processing services. Y2 clarifies the conditions associated with data processing services. 7K, subsection 6-2, F1 lowercase I, fueling station canopies. It updates gas station to fueling station and relocates this language to subsection 7-4 S10 for consistency. 7L, section 7-4 S, fueling stations, updates again gas stations to fueling stations and includes 7-4 S10 as specified above regarding canopies for consistency. And I'm happy to reread any portion of that.
When we went through the most recent application for a special use permit on an event facility, I think everybody recognized that the lot that they were looking to do that on was too small for what they were wanting to do. I don't know that 70 was the magic number, just as we were looking at lots around the city, you know, airily kind of 70 felt like a better number to start the floor of that kind of conversation for some of those more intense uses, which is where those all ended up. Some of the other things, yeah, I can't imagine anybody ever doing an airport here, but for example, if somebody tried to, they'd have to be a lot further away from the surrounding properties and all of that to even be able to ask for it. Some of these things are just best practices for design. You know, our design for gas stations requires the pumps to be in the back and requires a peak roof and to make it look more like an old time rural gas station than the gigantic things that you see at Quick Trip with the Klieg lights everywhere and all of that, right? We have a dark sky ordinance. This is much better at supporting that kind of thing. But just some thoughtful updates while they were in there.
Correct.
And it doesn't really preclude anything because specifically the fueling stations, we've seen where these requirements are in place. Even the Quick Trip can adapt.
Yes,
make a better configuration. So
they just have to do it our way.
Just-
Any thoughts on?
Yeah, just a question, if I could. And this is clarification, to make sure I'm looking at this correctly.
Right.
I'm looking at event center small and event center large. And the change, and this on page 20 in the table, just a few down from the top. event center large, the way that's controlled is with superscript B.
Correct.
And B, the note in B says, use must be located in a parcel of 70 acres or more. So,
Correct.
so, an event, a large event has a lot of the acres. And then it has to be set back at least 200 feet from any property line or a lot containing a residential use.
Correct. Yes, sir.
And the 70 was determined just by looking at lot sizes.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
It was a bit of a thing around sort of what are the densities in around lots roughly that size, and you know, you get an awful lot of, you know, 30-acre lots next to each other, and you really wouldn't be able to get those sorts of buffering sort of situations in the districts.
And where did we start with on this? What was the code? What's the current code on this? Minimum
There wasn't.
acreage?
There wasn't.
There wasn't.
There wasn't, was there?
There
Okay.
wasn't.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I was trying to figure between agricultural retail and roadside stands, where does, small landowner or lot owner that has, ag for sale or something for sale, where does that fit? And do we have a requirement on where they can locate that? Is that in here? Their stand? Or is that already in the code?
It is, we
I just didn't know where it falls.
There are two, either one would be available. Agricultural retail can be an enclosed building. Roadside stand is either vehicle or an open structure. No proposed changes to roadside stand, but there's some changes to the agricultural retail category, but either one, depending on what the property owner is seeking to do.
the thing that we were considering, when we were talking about it, is this idea that, you may have with some of the stuff that the conservation fund is doing and all that here, we may end up with some 400 or 500 acre farms, which would be fantastic, right? They put those under conservation easements and all of that. And, if you had a farm stand supporting a 500 acre farm, you might want it to be a little larger, controlling them for smaller lots. That's all.
We're trying to make the ability to sell produce on the site easier.
Right.
The only change with roadside stands is the only change was the temporary sanitary facility or trash receptacle can no longer be viewed from the city street.
Okay.
That's the update.
Which just means they have to put the dumpster in the back.
Exactly.
Right? That's the whole idea.
It just wasn't in the code prior.
And so the country inn now that it has more acres for like someone trying to build the country inn, right?
That's correct. It has to be on 10 acres or more.
And my thing is, with this last project we had, there were a country inn, there was a large event center and all this stuff on 28 acres. How can you put in all that stuff into 28 acres?
So the event facility covers you on the event facility piece. I mean, it's still, these kind of decisions on special use permits are still going to come down to the discretion of the council. As to whether or not it's appropriate on the lot that they're asking for, because there might be uses that people want to do that are large event facilities that wouldn't be appropriate on 70 acres too. But we're trying to set the bar higher as a starting point so that at least you're not even asking below a certain point, There's no
It still
magic.
gives you the opportunity to.
Yeah,
have a
but there's not
conversation
magic to
about
that number. You could make it higher if you wanted, it's just trying to balance, again, I guess, people's rights to do things with their property against people's not right to have super negative impacts on their neighbors. This also doesn't change the fact that, you can still have an event on your farm or whatever, 8 times a year, right? If you get a permit for that, which is not an event facility, it's just, I'm doing this thing. And that's another thing that, as we've seen on Wilkerson Mill, right, can sometimes cause issues for the neighbors. So, but that's not being addressed here. That's not addressed in this conversation.
Can I ask a question to Mike? Just an interpretation. If I want to have a country inn and a large event center, do I need to have 70 or 80 acres?
70. Those are just minimum thresholds. I don't see them as additive.
So you don't add them.
That would not be my interpretation, no.
I have one more clarifying question. So for the these roadside stands, did we add in any language for signage? Or is that already in? I didn't,
I don't think we changed anything from the sign ordinance
We
relating
don't.
to this.
okay, so we're just,
That's right. Yeah, there aren't any sign ordinance changes. I'll toss this out there. I've said it many times before. We need to be overhauling our sign ordinance.
Yeah.
Not that the regulations are horribly out of line with what we want, but it's old. It just needs attention.
okay,
That's a big deal. Ours is very closely aligned with the Georgia Model Code with some changes that match what we're doing, but not, yeah. That's the next project, maybe.
okay.
So the little family that has a garden that wants to go out to the edge of their driveway, they can do that, no problem. They put a sign on the front of their piece of wood, vegetables for sale. We did.
Right,
We gotta
that's
still
right. And
use
it'd be,
common sense when we
That's right.
go through this.
that's right, regulated by the sign ordinance, right? Yeah.
Regulated by the sign ordinance.
Right.
So then my question would be very simple. Can you put a sign on your piece of wood that says vegetables for sale? Does that
Ye-
fit your sign ordinance?
Yes,
Okay, that
yes,
was my
as long as it's not too big, not too tall. Yeah.
All right, we don't allow billboards for anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I guess what I was bringing to attention, the idea too would be where it was, half mile up the road, right? Where it says, I don't know.
You're
teaches
talking about
it-
dragging
Right.
signs to it.
Right,
Hey,
right now, we
Right.
don't allow remote signs that
Right.
way, but,
So-
Right.
If it's ag related or something like that.
Right, so the signs,
about
the kind of sign you can have, how many signs you can have, how big they
All
can be,
that.
are regulated by the use of the property. And so if that other property owner had a use that allowed him to have a sign, and that sign had information about your property and not his, that's okay, we can't regulate the content of the sign, but that property would have to be eligible to have that kind of sign, which not all properties are.
Yeah.
Residential property, for example, can't have the big kind of sign that you would have for one of these roadside stands or for a farm, or something like that.
there's a notion to temporary signs versus permanent signs, which is different,
That's right.
right?
That's right. The little ones, yeah, the little temporary ones on sticks. Yeah, anyone can have two of them. No regulation what they say. So yeah, they can certainly say, if your neighbor
That's,
half a mile
that's
down the
generally what
road.
you see. Muscadine's half a mile up, your neighbor let you put it on,
Right.
Yeah.
that's allowed.
Yeah.
Not yet, not in the right of way.
Right.
Daryl reminds us, 10 feet off of the road. but-
Not in the bush hog's way.
No, I was just like, to be clear so that I think it's, is he? Oh, I'm dying. Off. Okay, thanks. That was it. I just wanted to make sure when we look at signage again, that we're clear, so that it's really simple for folks to know what they can and can't do. That's all.
I mean, honestly, I think you can do more than people think. But we should probably just put out a little flyer or something that says, you got a roadside stand, here's what you can do. Having a garage sale, here's what you can do. Wanna celebrate your favorite political candidate, here's what you can do, right? All of the things, and then people don't have to worry about it. It's like the church signs, right? Everybody's allowed. It's allowed. Right? We'll add it to Mike's list.
I have it written down.
Next.
Section number 8, additional changes. It's the intent of this revision to address necessary text updates based on city staff feedback and professional expertise to ensure compatibility of the Unified Development Code and Comprehensive Plan. Revised language is necessary. It's just some commas and colons. Code allows residential density in the village, VL, or hamlet HM districts to be calculated by either unit size or block net density. Subsection 8A, A3, residential density calculation now clarifies two options for calculating density, unit sizes or block net. The unit size table is not changed, it's unchanged. The block net density encourages development densities in mixed-use districts, HM and VL, in order to achieve true open space protection community-wide. These density unit allocations are adjusted based on residential unit densities within a block as indicated. When a block in a mixed district is developed at a higher density, a reduction in density units is permitted. For density equivalent less than 1, it requires that a minimum of 50% of the density units applied must come from DTCs or externally sourced TDRs. Second bullet, third, code allows residential density in the village VL or hamlet HM districts to include historic building preservation bonuses. Subsection 8B2 bonuses clarifies density bonus for historic building preservation with conditions.
That was recommended by the Historic Commission.
Fourth bullet, code specifies additional requirements for lot line adjustments, TDR availability on lots with existing dwellings, and for lots reserved for future dwelling sites, and fence materials permitted within the city. I'll walk through those. Subsection 8C, A2 lot line adjustments clarifies conditions when lot lines of existing properties of 20 acres or smaller, or existing properties of 20 acres or larger are adjusted with adjoining properties. Subsection 8D E2 TDR is available, clarifies that 1 TDR per existing dwelling is deducted on properties within a sending area. Subsection 8EH reservation for future dwelling sites clarifies that any additional dwelling site reserved under the conservation instrument on the base area property will reduce the number of TDRs available by 1 TDR for each acre or portion that is reserved for residential uses or accessory uses within the sending area. And then subsection 8FQ, F and fence and wall materials found in the last row of the table clarifies that metal designed to look like wrought iron is permitted in the RL district or required open space and developable areas.
So the table that we sort of developed around the
Block net.
block net density really was a recognition that at your sort of minimum residential density of 3 units to the acre, that's barely below a sort of a suburban sort of density, and that to encourage higher densities and to create greater preservation, that the denser you get, and we sort of broke it down by what you would expect in roughly townhouses, and then the higher density from there, that you end up getting a little bit of a bonus, if you will, on the amount of DTCs it's going to take to do that, and that what that does is sort of acknowledges the more efficient use of land in that case.
Can you do 8C, number 1, both affected lots in the rural district? Explain it again.
Oh,
Subsection
8C, right.
8C.
8C is identifying when you have a lot line adjustment with the neighboring property. And so what it does is when you're in the RL district. And so number 8, okay, so subsection 8C, A1 is current in the code. The only change is the word and. 2 is identifying when a lot is over 20 acres in size. It may be reduced to under 20 acres if that reduction actually does increase another lot, but also doesn't provide an additional, doesn't reduce your lot to under 3 acres. So as long as no resultant lot is
So you
less
can
than
create
3
a bigger
acres.
lot to build on.
Give an example.
Yeah,
of it.
Yes.
you got 2, you've got 20 acres, your neighbor's got 9, your neighbor who's got 9 wants a little bit of your 20 acres to be able to create a better driveway configuration. You're basically moving that line between the 2 of them. It can reduce this one only by the amount that this one gets increased.
Would that require a sale of property?
No, this is just adjusting the lot line accordingly. You wouldn't sell the
I mean,
property.
if it were 2 owners, it
You're
might
saying if
might
it's
be a
2
sale.
owners.
I mean, you could
but look,
sell
you're
it,
gonna
but I'm saying
adjust
you
the
don't
lot
have
line. I
to.
don't know of any owner that's gonna do that.
You
This-
can.
It would require a sale of property.
Right, there's no requirement. So yes, so the one owner would sell their half-acre sliver to the other neighbor as a part of that process.
A better example might be if you have a 1 acre lot and a 20 acre lot that you own that are next to each other, and you want to turn one into a 10 and one into an 11.
But if I got
you're allowed
20
to do that.
acres,
Right.
I can't sell my kid all 5. But if
So-
I want to have a lot line agreement with you, I can sell you a slither.
So the key is this doesn't allow any creation of any new lots. It just
I'm
allows.
not
people
worried
to
about new lots. I'm worried about the citizens' rights to enjoy their 20 acres and create their own farm at it if they want to. All I hear is, just like that right there, yeah, you can slither it off to make this work, but the family can't. Unbelievable. Of course they can certain things, but I mean, boy, you make it awfully complicated. Very, very complicated. And I know you probably have a rebuttal. That's fine.
I'm not gonna say a thing.
That's the problem that people have in this town. That's what I'm telling you. And we all know it. Yeah.
This is directed at people at the town, in the town. But anyway,
All I can do is go by the phone calls I hear. And that's who I represent to people. I don't represent anybody sitting here at the state, I'm most elected representative district. So, anyway, I guess that's a conversation for another day.
anybody else? The last thing about the fences was just a recognition of the fact that nobody uses wrought iron anymore. They all use aluminum, cast aluminum. It looks like wrought iron.
I do. I use
And our ordinance didn't allow that.
all around my
before.
pool. Yeah, right answer, expensive.
Any other
That's all we have.
words of wisdom? Anybody else have any questions, anything that we've skipped over that you want to go back to, or?
So what you're seeing here, of course, is you've got a very, complex zoning ordinance that reveals, issues that come up at time to time, and that you have to sort of tune these things as you go. The alignment, your ordinance it's easy to forget if you're dealing with it every day. Your ordinance is unique in the region, in the country, really. There's not really any great examples, and it aligns as well as what is a reasonably blunt tool. Zoning ordinances are limited in what they can do because of the constitutional issues and whatnot, but yours aligns superiorly with your comprehensive development plan and your stated goals around conservation. So it's easy to forget that you've got really something special here, and it takes some tuning as it goes, but it is something that is gonna deliver what you're looking for.
Just, and I appreciate that and all the work that you all have done. We had spoken at some point along the way about night sky and light
Did.
control ordinance adjustments.
Here.
They're attacking me, but the idea that the innovation of the LED means that, line of sight creates a glare and a violation of night sky that can't be adjusted by just saying you can't throw a light on adjacent property. And I had asked if we could do anything about that.
You have over 9 pages in the UDC that references night sky. Your ordinance is actually quite solid. I just don't know if it's being enforced appropriately with certain commercial or non-residential owners. But we did look at it. It's over 9 pages with charts and very clear what can and can't be seen from an adjacent property, because we were concerned about what you were just, revealing to us. And I think it's just really an ownership and a compliance issue.
The biggest difficulty we have is that.
It's not a code issue.
Our local utilities are exempted from following our code on that subject.
Right.
And the lights that most people are complaining about are utility lights,
Mhm.
and we're not allowed to regulate those. And that is a tragedy, frankly, because that is where most of the lights go in our community comes from.
And along those lines, Scott, as well, one of the things
Yeah,
that
usually.
one of those things that is referenced if I don't know if it's referenced in the section, but by reference, there's a national standard, the Illumination Engineers Society has the standard that basically is adopted as your code. And we've actually at South Base have some folks who know well about that because we do the studies on the energy around that.
Okay.
And I'm going to follow up with them around that and try to get Mike some additional tools around what you can and can't do, knowing about that standard.
Right,
Well,
because
and the-
section 519D even says shall be located, aimed or shielded so as to minimize glare and stray light trespassing across property boundaries and into the public right of way. So it's exactly what you're saying. It just, you can't enforce it with certain owners.
And I've met with CEO of Fairstone about this 3 times. I mean, there's just not a lot. Their concern is that if they do it for us, they'll have to do it for other people. And that's,
a shame.
$1 million light bulbs or whatever.
Right.
They're not even going there. State law doesn't make them do it, so. Yeah,
Is there anything else though that
Well,
was,
and it wasn't just, I want to stress that my concern is not just residential. When we were talking about the awesome movie studio project,
okay,
there was a lot of ambiguity about how much light would be thrown off of that thing in, you know, a 24/7 operation. And, you know, while, for example, the largest development being Serenbe doesn't seem to throw light, it's very clear that some of the larger projects that are being entertained or anticipated will throw enormous amounts of light. And I don't know what we have to
that's a great,
address that.
that's a great thing for us to take a look at. I mean, you do have a maximum lamp allowance, lumens per square footage, required shielding, et cetera. So we should take a look at that. Yep. Yep.
It's anywhere that a private developer is doing something, our.
I don't think there's a
ordinance
problem
is
then.
the model ordinance,
I agree.
darksky.org. You know, it's the best one in the country.
But how does that stuff play out against somebody saying, well, but I need to be safe in my parking lot of my apartment building, and so therefore, I mean, or do we have it detailed to the point where it actually addresses those things?
It's very detailed.
Okay.
It's very detailed.
And again, there's a difference between, you know, the kind of lighting you see at the average gas station, where it's so bright that you can't even see the pump, is not what's required for safety. It's what people think they need for safety. Visibility is required for safety. I'll send you the link. We'll go through all that.
I have
a lot. Yeah, okay. So, you know, the kind of lighting that's allowed, with the amount of bounce back that's allowed, it's properly shielded and all that. It's dimmer than what you're used to at those gas stations, but it's still plenty bright for safety, plenty bright for when the gas pumps are on. And it's what our ordinance requires. It is. Which is not to say that people aren't gonna have to remind them. You know they will. You know they will.
What kind of enforcement can be brought? I mean, the movies, I asked because we went over this with the movie studio and it was pretty clear that that it was sort of a like, oh, we promise.
The enforcement is you don't get the permit because you maybe take it down. The code enforcement. You put up the wrong light or whatever.
So that,
The specific difficulty with the movie studios, they do a lot of temporary
A lot
lighting
of
when they're
temporary
shooting,
lighting.
right? Yeah.
It was very clear it was going to be pretty ad hoc.
I see. See, because it's very clear in here how you would
You're outside.
comply. But I understand.
they've got a worksheet, the illumination engineers have a worksheet that would help with the, any of the permanent sort of work, so.
I think in the village of Hamlet, it's easier because the code is fairly clear and it's an engineering issue. It's not intermittent as much, right? Which we use.
Right, as long as we're covering, the point I'm making is that there are these ambiguities like the movie studio. And if we don't have anything in place, they get to say, well, we promise, and I don't buy it if it isn't on paper, you know.
Comes down, that's where you use their tax money to write the tickets.
But if there's not a piece of code that says you're gonna get ticketed for this, like
Violation of ordinance, it's a general ordinance violation.
like the temporary lighting though.
Yeah.
I'm saying, you're
Maybe-
violating your standards. Oh, it's like the temporary lighting allows. I think temporary lighting allows you just to totally blow it. I don't know how to figure it.
At the time, I recall that there were questions about being, you know, doing a night shoot that needs to look like day was gonna turn certain roads down there into a nightmare overnight, and nobody was happy with the result.
Right. Perhaps in that case, it should be a condition of zoning then, I would think. Unless you want to add temporary lighting as a portion of the update.
Might be a good idea.
Well, we should look at whatever the.
'Cause I don't think you have temporary in here.
Model code up there
Mhm.
For a reason, because it was consensus best code on that sky in the country. And so if there's a way that they address temporary lighting.
We'll look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Shannon. Yeah, I want to ask you guys, you know, when we had our spring fling, there was some conversation about the one house per 20 acres. And I'd suggested based upon how many acres somebody has, maybe they should be allowed a certain amount of cuts on their property. And I even suggested that, you know, we all meet and talk about this, and which way we're going to go. And I was assured that there would be some examples or something you guys would come back with. I see none of that. Can you tell me why?
We actually presented that at the office hours. We had several examples. We had a chart that identified different
What do you mean office hours?
instances.
And you called for us to come up here individually?
Correct.
Okay, and I made that very clear that we should be having this in a meeting so I can hear what everybody has to say. I think the divide and conquer aspect of meet with this person, these two or these two, I won't be attending that anymore. But you know, it was made very clear, because what a lot of people don't understand in this town is if they have 100 acres, okay, they can't do anything with it but sell it all.
So
There are a couple of things, but it's
the 100 acres?
okay. What it amounts to is that people don't like you telling them what they can and can't do with their property, because you think that I guess the government thinks that they're better off at telling us how to do what we want to do with our property. And people don't like that. This is all right here about restrictions on developers and what they need to do and everything else. And some of our conversation was about some of the citizens. And I find that very disappointing. I realize that, I mean, you can say the office hours, whatever. It means nothing. I was giving your word. I see none of that in here.
We did present it at the office hours for 4 days.
You never did present it to me.
That's correct. That's correct.
So when the consensus was to leave it as it is that what it was by you talking to everybody here?
Correct. That was the consensus.
Okay. So there's my answer. Thank you.
I don't remember agreeing
to a consensus
that we shouldn't discuss this. I
Did-
mean, this is clearly an issue that is of great concern to a lot of people in this town. It was handed down from Almighty on high that it would be 20 acres. And some people say, well, I'd make it 50. And that's great with other people's property. But we're talking about citizens who want input and oversight, not fiat handed down on them. And so, no, so maybe we should agree that we have another workshop, a kind of public conversation with these two committees, this council and the zoning commission, to address this instead of trying not to address it and saying, you know, and damn it, I'm sick of this word consensus. It's the consensus, or it's the best. Best, just because something's best doesn't mean it can't be better. Just because there's consensus doesn't mean there's valid contrary opinions. And I would like for us to actually, instead of saying, we talked about that, or we're gonna talk about that, let's actually talk about it. This 20-acre thing is upsetting to a lot of residents. That's been made clear. Councilman Schmidt has been on this for a long time. And all that ever gets said is, we addressed it, we might address it. Let's address it, okay? Can we have a motion to set up a workshop to actually address this in some way?
So
I'll make that motion.
you can't make a motion in this. meeting.
I know.
Number
He just
two,
asked for one, so I get one.
I'm going to correct the mischaracterization you make again and again. This didn't come from like on high, it didn't come from anybody like fiat.
Did it come from anybody else?
It came out of the comprehensive plan process that more than half of the people in this town,
Endless recitation of how it was and how which is great, but
you know, and the endless repetition. We talk about it in these meetings. The fact that people don't agree with you doesn't mean that we didn't talk about it, Scott.
I haven't even magic number.
The fact that people don't agree with Richie doesn't mean that we haven't talked about it. We've talked about it ad nauseum. We have.
No,
The fact that
majority of
you're a
this
brand new
table doesn't
council person
agree.
that haven't been
Majority
involved
of
in
the
30 other
citizens want the right
conversations
to-
we've had about it, doesn't mean we haven't talked about it. So when I refer back to conversations that happened before you were here, those are real conversations. We have talked about this
Mhm.
many times.
Didn't
And
the
the
original
comp plan
comp plan call
processes,
for
we
30
talked about
developments?
this in the comp plan processes.
Yeah.
Call for 30.
And the
Three
history,
times.
the history is the history, and that's fine. And we talked about it 3 times and documented. This has the feel of things like the reduction of the size of a village from 1,000 to 500 acres. And I get told, well, that was documented and we talked about it. I went through every note I could, old video. I don't find, can you document that? Because I can't. Similarly, this is an issue, whatever the history is, as of now, this is the issue that I get asked about as a council person representing District 3.
Mhm.
I have no dog in this fight. I can't do anything with my land that has to do with this. That doesn't matter. We get asked about it. It's a concern of these people. Richie gets asked about it. It's a concern of people in his district. Probably other people get asked about
I
it.
have to.
So instead of just, I don't know, shuffling around and saying, well, we talked about it and therefore it is, why don't we have a formal address of it? Specifically that,
That's what,
and work it out going forward. I don't care about the past. The past, we all understand. I'll stipulate the lecture, but let's actually address it going forward, given that it's a concern that keeps coming up and it's going to keep coming up, and we're just going to pick around the edges of the scab, or why don't we just tear it off and deal with it?
I got a question. Shannon, when you were talking to us one-on-one, which I feel like it's appropriate. It's appropriate for you to get feedback from us from this. It's appropriate for us to sit down and have this conversation, because if you handed me this, immediately expect me to have an intelligent conversation. I mean, I'm not that smart. I'm just not an expert in that. But had the consensus been the other way, I feel like it would have been in this document. So I
Correct.
feel like, and I didn't sit in on everyone's consensus, but I mean, I feel like that's the right thing to do. If people agreed, it seems like it would be on the table, but it doesn't feel like people agree. And that's.
Who are
and-
those
and we-
people that
and-
need to
And what
agree?
are the
So
alternatives? That's what was voted in.
Why are we talking about?
I'll listen to you when I'm finished speaking.
I'm sorry,
Please don't
sorry,
interrupt.
sorry.
No worries.
My,
That seems like that was voted in. The majority of the people sitting at this table seem to think that's what's best for the city. And because it's not in the document, that's maybe you feel like it should be. But apparently, the other three other people at this table did not feel that way. So I feel like you did your job. I don't feel like there's a conspiracy theory at all. I feel like this is kind of open discussion. That's what it's for right now. I have a funeral to go to with Crespo in a few minutes. But I don't feel like there should be all this angst. We agreed on 90% of what we're doing to preserve the preservation of our city, to keep it green. We do agree on that. And there's no reason to be, I just don't see a conspiracy theory. I don't feel like we should disrespect people. We can disagree and still get along. And I feel like that's what we need to do.
I guess I'm a little lost on the nature of the phrase conspiracy theory here.
Well, the 400, to be a minimum village was 1,000 acres. Right? It was 1,000 acres. There's been many times the minimum required space for some of our developments have changed.
Right.
And I think, Rick, you can correct me, everything we do has been by state requirements of open meetings, advertisements. Before you have a zoning change, there's a certain number of required advertisements and first reads. Have we ever violated one of those? So whether you saw the 500-acre reduction, somewhere it did go through that process.
And I'm saying I was there and it's not in my notes. And I
you were there,
looked up
okay.
the old video and I don't see it being discussed anywhere. But we're not even talking about that. We're
Okay.
talking about the 20-acre rule and I don't think there's a consensus among the citizens that that's okay. I don't.
you may be right. I'll tell you this, though, there has been a consensus about that every time we've had a public
But
process.
again, the window, the window around that should have, I mean, this was, it was quite an experience to stand around. I mean, there's a it's not just about what's on the map. It's about what's not on the map. And so when somebody says, well, then how many acres is it? 20, 18, 17, 57? What about other alternatives like design controls that would actually address some of the issues I mean, 20 acres, I can show you some pretty awful looking 20-acre places that do not contribute to the rural character of this place because there are no design controls. I know that's difficult. And I'll be perfectly straightforward here. You refer to my ignorance. I own it. I'm a poetry professor. I don't do this professionally. And so my what? Oh, well, the fact that I'm new, we'll say, as a stand-in for that. But the point being that there are other alternatives that we could explore that professionals know about that we don't talk about. Instead, we say 20. We say a number. Oh, and you don't like that number? What's your number? I can't tell you how many times I was asked that while running for District 3 office by people who were stuck on the idea of a number instead of what they're really talking about, which is what it looks like to live in a rural place. But we didn't talk about that. Instead, I get numbers. And I know, because I'm surrounded by people way better at me than all of this, that there have to be alternatives. And it would be nice if those entered the public discussion as part of this. Oh, those have been done, I guess. Okay, never mind. Forget everything I said, everybody.
So rude.
I'm
pejorative in everything you say, and when I try to respond, I'm just switching off, something like that. Ridiculous.
I apologize. I'm not feeling very well today, but I also have been around. And I keep getting told, as you keep telling me, it's been done. Please.
That is mine.
Okay, here.
What I was going to say is we have had those kinds of conversations over the course of the years many times, and we will certainly have that again at the comp plan process, right? Because that's a process where you actually try to get as many people from the community out. It's not self-selecting. It's not 3 or 4 angry people. It's everybody in the community coming out to have a thorough conversation, professionally led, to talk about the kind of issues and what's changed since the last time we had this conversation. We have them every 5 years. I actually tried to get us to have one last year and DCA wouldn't let us because I wanted to get to the bottom of this conversation. So this is not something I'm trying to forestall. I'm working within the bounds of what's actually legally allowed by a city government, right? We have a comp plan that says certain things. We need a comp plan. When we get away from that comp plan, we're no longer supported in our zoning, right? That's all it is. That's all it is. I'm not disagreeing with you about having the conversation. It's a smart conversation to have. It's just a big conversation and it requires a lot more time than a couple of little tweaks to the zoning. I've been through these processes. Yes, I do know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about going through the processes. Now, we have had the conversation about the minimum acreage in the context of our comp plan again and again and again. And the consensus of the community has always landed in a place. 20 acres is just a number. To your point, 19 or 21 wouldn't make much difference, right? It would be nice to have design guidelines, but every time we've talked in this community about the idea of design guidelines, about telling people how they can build their house and what color it might be and what design it might be, nobody likes that either, right? And I hear you. I think that would be a solution to the problem. But every time we've gone through that conversation in a public setting here, and our first comp plan had more than half of the homes in the community involved. So it was the most involved one that anybody I know has ever seen. The concepts of things like that, telling people how their house gets to get designed, had huge pushback, right? So I'm not arguing your point. I think that there are good ways to solve those problems. I think some of them are hard to do in this context, and it's a bigger conversation than a couple of tweaks to the zoning. It is. That's my perspective.
Okay, I understand and respect everything you say there, and I think that's good. Hearing is that you're open to a conversation, that we can, that open to another public address of this. And what I would like to do is ask that we solicit what alternatives are possible. And with an eye, you mentioned how you can build your house and the colors and stuff like that. But I think things like
size,
roadside buffers,
For sure.
gates, lighting, all those
sure.
things probably are more indicative of what people do when they on their 20-acre mammoth
We agree.
self-presentation. And so, and let me just add that I'm very sorry for any show of temper I might have let go.
It's in there.
I'm sorry?
I said it's in there.
It is in there, but yeah, it's on tape, so, but my apologies for losing my temper a little bit. But we go round and round and round and round and round. And some of these things don't seem to seek any kind of resolution. I mean, I feel like things happened around that don't really reflect the will of the people living here. And I want always, therefore, to have everything happen publicly with a discussion, with as much participation and input as possible. And then I'm frustrated myself because I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm just watching the pattern. So my apologies. I'm sorry for losing my temper with you.
I'll say the same. And here's the thing, right? So I have been through these processes, these public processes many times in the city. And feel a little frustrated myself sometimes that we can't get past certain conversations. Here is a reality. We will be having a comp plan process starting next year. One of the things about public process that I've come to find is that the self-selection that happens at meetings, or the people that seek you out who say, everybody I talk to says this thing, you need to do something about this thing, aren't actually representative of the community as a whole. And when you do a broader process where you try to get everybody in the community in, you find that the positions in the community are far broader sometimes than you think. I've often said that when you do this kind of work, and I'm not the person that invented this, Andres Dwani is, but the idea of doing public process by anything other than jury selection, where you make sure you've got a representative pool from the entire community to have input, is by its nature not fair. It's self-selecting. The only people that come are the people that want to come because they want something, right? And so that's why, particularly the comp plan process that I ran, which was the first one, we did so much to drive, and I wasn't an elected official, I wasn't an appointed official, I was just a volunteer trying to get people to a meeting. And we did so much public process to get people out, to get that broad community engagement. And I would challenge all of us going into the next comp plan process to make sure that we do that again. Because it's very disappointing to me that the updates that we did at 5 years and 10 years had much lower attendance, right? People are like, oh, it's all fine, city's doing great. I don't see anything I don't like. And you know, getting everybody in the room to have those thoughtful conversations facilitated by people who actually are subject matter experts. And I'll say I've become one too. You know, it's so important to do because it's hard, right? And it's hard to get what the possibilities are out in front of people. It is.
That is part of it.
The comp plan.
Can we, for the, hello?
We'll
As part-
absolutely address these things.
The 20-acre rule.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That dark skies. We address, when we did that first one, we had, I think, 15 or 16 different committees, each with 10 or 15 people on them, looking at issues like that, right? So that people were doing deep dives individually and then reporting back to the group on those deep dives.
Right.
You can have a really thorough and engaged process if you make that your intention.
Well, I'd like to, and I take your point on the idea of self-selection, but I also, in a population of a district of a relatively small population, I hear from a lot of people.
I get it.
And so I don't think it's a tight self-selection at all. But as long as we have, I think that, you know, you all are such a resource for all of the possibilities. And we've been looking at this very narrow possibility, the blunt instrument of 20 acres to solve a problem that doesn't really solve demonstrably. I can drive you around. And so I just ask that is be addressed rather than just that, like some number, because I don't think even the proponents of the 20-acre rule or greater believe that it really works that way. So you all for listening to me.
They see other examples of
therapy
people
session.
breaking.
It is.
Nothing's being done. They see other people doing what they want to do and nothing's being done. So. I want to vote for some men. I mean, there's plenty of places. What this zoning does is it makes people think about ways to circumvent it.
That's what all zoning does. And we're pretty good actually about following up on people. But the point that Scott's making is an incredibly valid one that I want to second in a non-official way, because we're not doing any votes here. The idea of having as thorough a public process the next go around And I always think that that's wise, because what I found is that anytime you give people all the data points to look at this, right, there's always something that can be better. But the general context that we're working in is the best in the country. Nobody else has been able to do what we're doing. And, you know, there are always details that can be better, no question. But I couldn't support that concept more. I also think that the recommendations that you guys have made here are really good recommendations for some things that live inside the context of our current comp plan, which is the current law of the land here, right? And so while I fully recognize and agree with the idea that we should dive into the things that are still objects that could be better, when we have that process that we tried to do this year and DCA wouldn't let us because they don't let you do it early, that we all dive in to get people in to make that happen well. And in the meantime, we've got some that we out right now. So
I think Ruby had some.
No, what I wanted to say, Tom, I know that the comp process won't start until next year. But would it be or make sense just to have a conversation with the resident who are complaining about the 20 acres, just to sit down and have a conversation? Maybe they can understand it more clearly.
sure, always happy to do that.
Of course.
And
Always
you know,
happy to meet with anybody anytime.
Okay. I want to tell you, I do appreciate your work, okay? And I did get your phone call. We couldn't meet. I was busy.
I understand.
I'm up here 2 days a month, 3 days now, 4 days now, which is fine. That is my job. Unfortunately, it's just better to have everybody in the same room with the same discussion topics on the table. The thing that makes me different is whether Rodney's sitting here, Scott or Tom, I'll say what I think. I don't think half of them will. So I don't know what they're thinking. So, but I do know this, you know, the comp plan, the original comp plan had room for 3 massive developments with mileage restrictions. So now we're down to what, 500 feet, and put one wherever you want, drag them across the whole damn town. That's where we're at. So if we want to get back to this original comp plan, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's put, you know, we realize things change. We realize, you know, businesses, everybody changes with the times or you get left behind. And one thing that has changed is people want another option. But so you talk about all this good stuff we do, and then over here, told you ain't do nothing. You sit around and wait on somebody to buy me. Okay, so it makes no sense. And that now we can move lines, we can squiggle lines. Why can't I squiggle lines? Why can't I apply for a small subdivision or farmland? Got 10 acres, I'll apply for something else. What is it? Country Inn? Just build me something else. Because that's what people are doing now in your town. Friendship Church of all places are calling me about that wall, Mike. That wall, you told them it was a civil matter. That wall was on the church property. They've already dealt with City Hall. City Hall ain't dealing with him. Well, we're past City Hall. We don't have any form of what do you call it? Code enforcement or whatever to make sure people are doing something right, you know? We had who was it? Deneen's mom up here, got 3 people for putting fences across the lake. Told them it's a civil matter. You can look at me retarded or not, but we can play it on YouTube. The point is, this needs to be fixed. Okay? And I don't have a problem attending. I did attend the meeting. I attended the meeting with everyone sitting in this room. And we all heard the same thing. And then we came back with a document that addressed none of my concerns. None.
Rich, something to you. You just use the word retarded. Please don't use that. That's highly offensive to a lot of people.
Did I use that?
You did.
Okay, I'm
Please
sorry.
don't do that again.
Okay, I understand. I get, no big deal. But anyway, so, you know, when I hear people tell me, you know, whatever, should have come to the meeting, should have done this, should have done that. Yeah. I did come to the meeting with everybody sitting in the room. And I even asked a question when I left the meeting. And what I was told was, when we get the document, it will be addressed and we will discuss it. It wasn't addressed at all. And if it was put aside. Nobody told me. And that's fine. So you talk about, and it's no big secret. It's no big secret. I get it. But either way, we'll deal with it later. If we can get, Tom, if you can put that on the agenda next month, I'll be glad to bring in some options that the people seem to love. And yes, you can sell 20 acres, but not everybody wants to sell 20 acres. If they've got 40, they don't want to sell half their freaking land. Have a government tell them you sell half your land or you sell it all. That's your choices right now. Or sell 20 acres. It's not a good choice at all. It shouldn't be your choice. You bought your property. It shouldn't be your choice. Unbelievable. That's all I get. Sorry, Rodney, if I did not mean to, I was just talking out loud, bro.
I know a lot of people that.
I hear you, bro. I hear you. I got it.
Anything,
Understand.
anything anybody else want to add? Because
Yes,
we can put a fork in this. I know some people are trying to go to a funeral and I think we're set for the moment.
Hey, Jim.
Tomorrow. Hang on just a sec. We're done with this.
Okay,
right?
thank
Mitchell,
you.
yeah, happy to talk to you.
Thank you.
Tomorrow is a 3:30 work session. So our work session's starting an hour early just because there's a lot on the agenda. Correct. They're both public, but that's the work meeting. You mean on the Merrill project?
No, on, well, Maryland and also